In September 2024, Hurricane Helene rapidly intensified to a category storm, bringing 140 mile per hour winds and swept through the southeastern United States. It caused absolute devastation. Devastation to infrastructure, to communities, critical lifelines, and it was also one of the most deadly storms in our recent past, with over 100 lives lost. Its rapid intensification points to the need to better understand the effects of climate change and how we deal with them and how it impacts our dams and our communities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Pittman for a panel discussion from a host of wonderful folks who had boots on the ground during the event. They can tell you their stories, some of their lessons learned, and how we can improve for the future. Take it away, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for being here. We're excited to share a little bit with you about Hurricane Helene. As John said, massive storm that impacted much of the East Coast, especially western North Carolina, just about 1 year ago today. We've got a great group of panelists and presenters here who were intimately involved with the storm in many ways and are here to offer their perspectives and experiences, as well as hopefully some lessons learned that we can take away as the dam safety community. So I'm going to start with introducing our panel here and then turn it over to Bill for a presentation. So going from left to right here, we've got Toby Vinson. Toby's with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. He's the director of the Division of Energy, Mineral, Land Resources, which has overall responsibility for the state's dam safety program. And as you can probably figure out from that title, he was intimately involved with the response to Helene, the state's response, as a part of the Emergency Operations Center and the post-storm assessment. We've got Stan Aiken, who also is with North Carolina DEQ. He's the regional engineer in the Asheville Regional Office. For those who aren't familiar with Western North Carolina, Asheville is kind of the largest municipality there. So Stan was right in the middle of the storm, involved in the response and the post-storm assessment of dam safety infrastructure. We've got Mark McIntyre next. Mark's the Director of Energy and Environmental Affairs for Duke Energy. One of the many hats that Mark wears is being one of Duke's lead representative in the Emergency Operations Center during these type of events, coordinating with multiple stakeholders, including North Carolina DEQ. Next, we've got Laura Gross. Laura's with TVA. She's currently the General Manager of Safety and Business Continuity, but a year ago during the storm, she was the Senior Manager of Dam Safety Services. And so she was, I think there were people coming back from this conference and she was not at this conference. So she was kind of leading TVA's response in terms of a lot of the dam safety assessment, the monitoring, and the overall emergency response. Next, we have Dustin Waycaster. Dustin is the Fire Chief and Director of Emergency Management for the town of Lake Lure, North Carolina. So we'll show a map, but Lake Lure is just about 30 miles south of Asheville, so it's a small town. More than anybody on this panel, Dustin was boots on the ground for sure, and responsible for hands-on emergency response, rescues, evacuations, and has some tremendous stories to tell as a result of that. Next, we have Leslie Carrero. Leslie's the Assistant Director of Water Resources for the City of Asheville. She's responsible for overseeing and managing the city's water infrastructure, which we'll talk about two of their primary dams were in the impacted area, North Fork and Beatree. And last, many of you know Bill Capel. Bill's the President and Chief Meteorologist of Applied Weather Associates. And we're going to kick it over to Bill to start us off giving a presentation on some of the background of the storm and the meteorology. So Bill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks everybody for being here. Good morning. And hopefully this will be, I know it'll be an interesting panel discussion and presentation. This is a topic that's, of course, affected so many of us in so many ways. And I just remember this time last year standing up and giving a presentation on another extreme event, this time though from a long time ago, but talking about, hey, there's a hurricane coming towards Florida. That could be a problem for the southeastern U.S. I remember specifically Toby and our representatives from South Carolina kind of getting concerned when I had talked about that. I think it was like a Tuesday morning, so 3 or 4 days ahead of time. And of course, we know what happened a few days later. So what I'm going to talk about first, though, is the storm itself and kind of why it was so unique. But on the context of it was forecast very well. What happened was well known several days ahead of time, and this isn't that uncommon in these type of events, but the issue is, what do we do with that information? How do we internalize it, and how do we use it to have a good response and make sure that our, of course, dams and communities are safe? So let's take a look at a couple of things associated with Helene. First of all, if you look back at the hurricane season from last year, a pretty typical season, nothing too unusual, about an average number of storms coming through the Gulf Coast and the Mid-Atlantic. And, when you look at these hurricane paths from that time frame, they're not that unusual, kind of things we see all the time. So just looking at that, why was Helene so devastating? Well, we'll talk about in a second. But we kind of begin to wonder, is it the curse of ASDSO? Because it seems like every year or two we have these kind of events. I mean, I remember back in 2011, Hurricane Irene, and the devastation in parts of New Jersey and New York and New England. Of course, we had Harvey in 17, Florence in 18. In 2021, the heavy rainfall just west of Nashville. And then, of course, Helene happens, and it's almost at another level in some cases when you think about the devastation that occurred. But when you think about those things, they happened before, they'll happen again. I mean, just think back to July of this year in Kerrville, Texas, the devastation we had there, right? These kind of events continue to happen. And so what we want to do is see, what can we learn from these situations that can help us be more responsive and better prepared and deal with them when they do come, both before and after. So Helene itself, the track was one of the key aspects that made it such a devastating event. So this is the hurricane track, and what you'll notice here is it was a very strong storm. The purples right here are when it's about a category 3 and 4, right before landfall. And the problem is, it came right up in a perfect location to produce the most amount of rainfall possible along the Appalachians, and especially the east and east-facing slopes of the Appalachians as you get into South Carolina, North Georgia, and North Carolina. The other part that was so devastating was the timing of the storm and the movement. There's a couple of things that factored in that made it just another notch above what normally happens. There was rainfall for a few days before the event. It's sometimes called a precursor rain event, or a PRE, if you see that in the terminology. So that kind of set the stage to get things saturated and made things really ready to take on the extra rainfall and cause a lot of extra flooding and problems. The topography of the Appalachians was, of course, a big deal. I like to say, if this storm had happened over Kansas, we probably would have only had 10 or 15 inches of rainfall, not 30 plus. And that's where the topography comes into play. So all these things kind of conspired in this particular situation to make it a problem. And in fact, if you look at the forward speed of Helene as it moved through the region, it was one of the outliers when it comes to speed of the storm. So not only did you have the storm coming through in a perfect situation with precursor rainfall, you had slow movement, so it could sit there and pull in moisture off of the Gulf and the Atlantic for a couple days right into the Appalachians. So all those things came together. But this wasn't a surprise. Again, as we talked about a year ago at this time, we knew 3, 4, 5 days ahead of time that this was forecast to happen. Now, not only was the forecast of heavy rainfall accurately predicted, both the timing and location were accurately predicted. So when you look at the forecast a few days ahead of time, here was Helene when it was just forming off of the Yucatan Peninsula. This was about, the morning for our time, the afternoon and early evening of September 24th. So we have several days ahead of time. We're watching it form. Here's the trough that produced the rainfall ahead of the storm. You can kind of see all the pieces starting to come together here the next day. This is when we were talking about it in Denver, and we were talking, wow, it's raining pretty good in the southeast. There's a hurricane coming. Is it going to get into the region and cause a problem? And exactly that is what happened. So you have this low pressure coming through, picking up the storm, pulling the moisture in, and adding extra emphasis and oomph to the rainfall. Again, when you look at the forecast for this event, this is 3, 4, 5 days ahead of time. We were already showing very heavy rainfall over the southeastern U.S. Now the problem is when you see these things, they're put out quite often. Does that have a lot of meaning to any of us? What does that mean? You see a forecast for potential of heavy rainfall over the southeastern U.S. and the Appalachians. Does that have meaning? What should I do about that? We get those forecasts all the time. Well, the Weather Service is trying to do a better job, and the National Hurricane Center to do a better job of kind of putting wording in here that will get your attention, right? So 2-3 days before the storm, they start to put out these notices that talk about catastrophic flooding and life-threatening rainfall. And there's been a lot of research over the years to try to get these advisories out that have wording in them that will get your attention, try to tell you, hey, this is something unusual, something different than we normally see. Yes, we have hurricane rainfall in the southeast almost every year. Yes, we have these events, but this one is unique and special. And I think they did a decent job of that. This is a timeline showing the forecast and events, so they were doing a good job of knowing it was going to rain heavily and be a really devastating event. But how do we communicate that information to the people who have to make decisions on what to do, and to the general public to know that this isn't just your every run-of-the-mill storm. This is a big one. And that's one of the gaps, of course, that we want to try to fill. And when you see the impacts of a storm like this, hopefully that we can learn those lessons from those kind of outcomes that, hey, these are the type of events we need to pay attention to when we see these kind of nomenclature that talk about these types of events. Because, of course, if it's happened before, it will happen again. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this, speaking of happening before, a storm almost the exact same location and similar magnitude occurred in July of 1916, Alta Pass, North Carolina. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first, when you look at the rainfall from Helene, just from an accumulation perspective, this is one of the things that made it so devastating. You had a pretty good amount of rainfall, like I said, precursor a day or two before, several inches of rainfall. By the way, these are inches per hour. So about on the 25th, 26th, you had 2-3 inches of rainfall widespread over the region. Some places had 4 or 5, even up to 6 inches of rainfall several days ahead of time. And then we had the main event over that last 24 to 48 hours where anywhere from 15 to 30 inches of rainfall accumulated. And at the very end, we had heavy rainfall right at the wrong time. So everything saturated, filled up to the top, and then we get heavy, heavy rainfall at the very end. There's nowhere for that to go, of course, and that results in significant flooding, landslides and debris and all the other things that happened. You know, one of the other things that was so devastating with Helene was the wind. I'm sure you guys will talk about this, but you know, during the storm when it was raining heavily, the wind was also very strong, especially up in the topography and the higher elevations of the Appalachians, which of course saturated ground, trees still fully leaved, and that causes a lot of problems, just the amount of trees that were blown down and all the debris that was pushed into streams and just causing extra problems. So just about everything you could have happen with this event. And again, this is a picture of the total rainfall that occurred with the storm. What's noticeable here, of course, is how it's anchored so strongly to the terrain of the Appalachians. Again, that really enhanced the storm and made it just so much worse than it would have been without the mountains, and moisture just flowing in off the Atlantic and the Gulf and slamming right into the higher elevations of the Appalachians there. Now, from our perspective, a couple interesting things were happening. So first of all, we were right in the middle of finalizing the North Carolina statewide PMP study. So we had just gotten PMP depths, but were done before Helene happened. So we had them without Helene. So, well, Helene happens, we better check and see what's going on and see if that changes things. Of course, that's a big deal for us. And of course, we had just finished work in northern Georgia for Georgia Power Southern Company, and also had done a lot of work for TVA. So we had a lot of work in the area that was affected by Helene directly and needed to be compared and see, does this change PMP? Is this a storm that we would obviously want to have in our database, and how does it compare to what had been done before? So one of the interesting things we were able to do was take the PMP depths we had just derived for North Carolina, look at some areas right there around Asheville and western North Carolina, and compare Helene to those rainfall events. And so this line right here is the Helene rainfall after maximization, right at about a 10 square mile area size in around Asheville, and you can see that it exceeds the other storms we had in our database. Now that's just for the tropical storm type. So when we talk about PMP, we do it by storm type, local storms, general storms, and tropical storms. For the tropical storm type, Helene does exceed the PMP in those areas at small area sizes, and this is for 48 and 72 hours. But when you put it together with all three storm types in that same area, it actually falls right on the PMP envelope curve. This is what, to me, this is what's awesome about this event, and what kind of is a real-world example of the PMP process working like it's supposed to. So this line here is a local storm PMP depth, which is the short duration, high intensity rainfall, which for small area sizes in North Carolina is a controlling event. But as you get to longer durations, you'll notice Helene is right here on this gray line, and it matches right up with our general storm PMP type at those durations. So it goes right to that PMP envelope and sits right there. So we have PMP without Helene, we get those values, we get Helene, maximize it, put it in, and it goes right at that PMP envelope, which is a great confirmation of the process that it's working like it's supposed to, and that Helene also does represent that upper limit of extreme rainfall. And of course, the results of that we saw very well from the outcomes of the rain. Another neat thing, again, is it isn't the first time this has happened. Again, this is a flood record from the French Broad River at Asheville. Notice it's a new record flood height from the storm, but the previous record was the 1916 flood that I mentioned. So back in July of 1916, a very similar event happened in almost the same place. Of course, there wasn't quite as many people or infrastructure there to have problems, but if there would have been, we probably would have had a similar outcome. The unique thing with Helene, though, is that it lasted longer. That July 1916 event, as we'll see here, that's this curve right here. It stopped pretty much after 24 hours. In fact, it was larger than Helene through 24 hours, but it gave up. Helene didn't, right? It kept getting rainfall for 2 and 3 days, which is one of the reasons we had so much devastation and problems. So the bottom line is, these have happened before, they will happen again. And really what's important is, what do we learn from these processes? How do we take those forecasted outcomes of, hey, you're going to have catastrophic rainfall, life-threatening flooding, flash flood emergencies. What does that mean to the average person who sees that and maybe sees those things once or twice a year? How do you respond to them? How do you internalize them? How do you take that forecast and do something meaningful with it? And as emergency action plans and first responders, what does that mean to you? How do you coordinate that information and get it out there so that people in harm's way can respond appropriately and we be prepared for it? Again, as we go through time, these events get better and better forecasted, so we have more and more lead time. We should be trying to figure out how to utilize that information as best we can to get people out of harm's way and prepare the infrastructure. And then from our perspective, we know that these have happened before and they can happen again, and these types of events really do a good job of confirming the process of PMP and precip frequency for extreme events. You know, when you look at this, it's probably more than a 10,000 year recurrence interval type of event, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen at some point in some place in time and that we shouldn't be prepared for it. So getting that information out there, communicating it properly, internalizing what that means, and responding to it is key. And I think the awesome part of the rest of the panel today is kind of understanding how all these people up here responded to this event and dealt with it and did the best that they could at the time, and then what we can learn from it. So I'm excited to hear the rest of it, and thanks for your time this morning.
All right. Thank you, Bill. That was fantastic. So before we get into the panel discussion, what we want to do is just go through a few slides just to give you some background, additional background, and just some reference. Just for as the panel goes through and is talking about different things, and we'll reference this back as we need to. We could show photographs of the devastation from Helene for this entire session and beyond. Unfortunately, we don't have that time, but we just wanted to share a few photographs, just if you're not familiar with it, just to give you an idea of some of the devastation from the storm. The top two photographs, again, Asheville is kind of the largest municipality in western North Carolina. Many of you may be familiar with the Biltmore Estate area, the River Arch District. This is, kind of right down in the main area, along the French Broad and Swananoa rivers. You can see kind of the extensive flooding that occurred. Bill showed before where the French Broad and how that peaked, kind of flood of record. Lower left is a small town, Marshall, North Carolina. It's also along the French Broad. And this town was more or less devastated as a result of the flood. And that wasn't an uncommon thing, unfortunately, during this event, for the small towns along the rivers to be more or less washed away in some instances. And that is the case on the bottom right. The town of Chimney Rock is a small town just upstream of Lake Lure on the Broad River. And, it's really kind of probably should have given you an aerial here, but the river just completely rerouted itself basically through the town of Chimney Rock and destroyed and washed away a good portion of the town. You can see in the top left, that's Lake Lure. That's debris in the lake as a result of the event. That is basically the town of Chimney Rock that was washed into Lake Lure as a result of this event. You can see some other examples of debris in Lake Lure, and we'll show you some others as well. But debris was a huge issue here, and we'll talk about landslides in a second. The top right is kind of certainly a dramatic photo. Thankfully, this person did survive this event. But again, as Bill said, those hours kind of Friday morning with everything being saturated and having very heavy rainfall, this flooding happened, a lot of the flooding in many areas happened very quickly, this sort of flash flooding type event. The bottom right is a personal one for me. This was a camp in Black Mountain, North Carolina. My daughter was in that building during the storm. Thankfully, she's okay. They saw the landslide coming down the mountain as they were sitting in that building and were able to get out. But it certainly makes this storm, to me, and as well as to everyone sitting up here, very personal and impactful. So just here's some, kind of, I guess, call them metrics as a result of the event, just to put some in numbers. So up and down the East Coast, there are over 250 fatalities as a result of this event. I believe it's over 120 in North Carolina alone. Damage estimates are, in some cases, up and down the East Coast, as much as $250 billion, with North Carolina about $60 billion of that estimate. Again, a huge issue here was that you don't have in coastal hurricanes was the debris and the landslides. So you can see that image there on the right is some of the documented landslides. That shows about 2,000. They're now up to about 4,000 documented landslides across western North Carolina and some in eastern Tennessee, and a few in South Carolina and Georgia as well. They think there's upwards of 15,000 landslides that occurred as a result of this event. Thousands of roads and bridges were washed out. Many of those still remain out of service today. And then this storm did tremendous impacts to our, the electrical infrastructure, which I think Mark's going to mention. This is just a snapshot from, this is North Carolina Dam Safety Inventory. This just shows kind of the structures in western North Carolina. So you can see there's quite a few regulated dams across western North Carolina. The red is the high hazard there. And then the picture on the bottom right is it's a photograph. That was a road leading to one of the dams. Many of the roads in western North Carolina looked like this as a result of the storm. It turned basically into kind of a river that was strewn with debris. So here are a few of the dams we're going to talk specifically about today. I mentioned before North Fork and Bee Tree Dam. They're the city of Asheville's water supply dams. They're located just east of the city of Asheville in Black Mountain, North Carolina. Then you've got Lake Lure Dam, which is just south of there. West of there, Duke Energy's project is Walters Dam, so relatively close to the North Carolina-Tennessee line. And then just across the line there is TVA's project, Nolichucky Dam. So just to share a few photographs, just to give you a sense for what these dams look like and what happened there. This is Bee Tree Dam, city of Asheville. It's a large, high-hazard earth-fill dam. You can see you had landslides into the reservoir. You had damage, slope stability issues on the downstream slope. You did have extensive flow through that chute spillway over there on the right abutment that resulted in significant damages downstream, but overall the spillway performed well. This is North Fork Dam. It's the city of Asheville's other project. This project went through a major upgrade project a few years ago. It actually won the ASDSO Rehabilitation Award of the Year several years ago. I think the designers and the owners and the contractors, no one ever suspected that a few years later they would see this large new fuse gate auxiliary spillway activate. But certainly it did during this storm, and one of the fuse gates did release as intended. This is Lake Lure Dam. So this is you may have seen these photos yesterday at lunch or some of them, but it's over a nearly 100-year-old concrete multiple arch buttress structure. You can see in the top left photo, bays 1 through 3, that's the normal gated spillway. That's where flows are normally passed. During this storm, majority of the arches of the dam overtopped and flowed, and that resulted in significant erosion at the abutments and damages downstream. Also, the photograph on the right, the dam did not overtop, but it had what we believe to be an internal erosion type failure on that left embankment. So it did not result in complete breach, but certainly significant issues there. This is Nolichucky Dam, again, in eastern Tennessee. You can see the photographs on the top there. So you had extensive flooding, some damage to the right abutment and damage to the powerhouse there. Extensive flooding and damages downstream as a result of that flow. And finally, we have Walters Dam here, the photographs in the bottom left. Again, you see the debris accumulated in the reservoir. That was a very common occurrence during this storm, significant flows. The other two snapshots are not Walters Dam, but it's Duke's series. Duke has a series of 11 dams. Well, the Catawba River watershed here, and you can see this graphic is the precipitation graphic on the right here has been superseded by what Bill showed, but you had in that watershed there, you had upwards of 30 inches of rain at the top there. So Duke, and Mark may talk about this some, but the operations considerations certainly of this whole series of dams were critical in this storm. So that gives a little bit of background. I'm going to go back to the beginning just in case we come back, but we're going to now kick it off and go through some questions with the panel. So, all right, everybody ready? Good. So we want to talk about the forecast Bill mentioned. Curious for everybody to hear, you all had that information. Did you feel well prepared and knowledgeable about the storm? How did that inform decisions and what did that look like? So Mark, we'll start with you and get Duke's perspective on that.
Yeah, sure, thanks, happy to. So good morning, everybody, glad you're here. You're all the ones that made the right decisions last night, apparently. Not sure how many people aren't here this morning who made bad decisions, but thanks for coming. So obviously the weather forecast mattered a lot to us. We pay attention to the National Weather Service, but we also have our own team of meteorologists. And that team does, their own forecasting. They're looking at historical forecasts. They're looking at what we might expect in a particular storm. But that forecast isn't just potential weather, right? That forecast is also looking at potential electrical outages. So a little bit about our company, and it might help you understand perhaps a little bit better our response to events like this. We're used to storms in the Carolinas. We're used to hurricanes in the Carolinas. We are what's called a vertically integrated utility. Unlike many of you where you live in the country, you may have an electric provider that owns your meter that is not the same company that owns the transmission system, and it's not the same company that owns the power generation. As a vertically integrated utility, we own all of it, from meter all the way through the lines to the generator. And I think that provides some advantages for emergency response, for storm response. We're able to leverage resources across business units. We're able to bring folks from the coastal plain. Usually when we're talking about a hurricane, we're moving resources from the west of the state to the east. In this particular case, because of the forecast from our meteorology team, looking at the likelihood of specific electrical impacts in specific areas, we were able to mobilize resources from the eastern part of our jurisdiction west and establish essentially response camps. So one of the things that we do ahead of a storm like this is, using all of that forecast information, we'll identify a handful of places where we marshal troops, if you will. So line crews, vegetation management crews. The number one causative factor for outages sort of in a normal day are trees. Trees coming down on lines, limbs coming down on lines. And that's certainly true for hurricanes as well, high winds. Number two is animals, so squirrels, snakes getting in transformers. In this particular storm, we certainly had damage associated from trees, but what we didn't anticipate and what we couldn't have anticipated really is the volume of water. So we've got the forecasting that we do. We know, generally speaking, where we think we're going to have large-scale electrical outages, but there are other things that we are doing ahead of a storm to prepare our system. So because we're vertically integrated, we've got to manage preparations at our power generation facilities. We've got to make sure our transmission system is ready to go, and we've got to make sure our distribution, small poles, small wires are ready, and we've got crews positioned to respond. In the path of this storm, we operate roughly 28 hydroelectric stations, 3 nuclear power stations, a number of large-scale natural gas-fired power plants, at least one, I think only one, coal-fired power station. So significant generation resources, roughly 7,000 megawatts of power generation between nuclear and coal along that Catawba watershed that you saw a picture on the last slide. That particular Catawba watershed, we use a tool that the smart folks at RTI have helped us develop that allows us to think about how we manage flows through that 11 reservoir system and not impact water supply for the 2 million people that rely on that system for drinking water. We've got 7,000 megawatts of generation on that system. It's not a flood control system. So in addition to sort of thinking about, okay, where are we going to have outages? How do we have to manage operations at our power plants to maintain business continuity and keep those things running? How do we manage water and all of the reservoirs that we own and operate? And incidentally, that 11 reservoir Catawba watershed, I mean, it's 80,000 acres of water. It's 1,800 miles of shoreline. As I noted, 7,000 megawatts of power generation. It's the water supply for over 2 million people. So there's a lot at stake as we try to manage that system in the days ahead of a storm like this, utilizing all the tools that we have available to us from a forecasting perspective. So obviously the forecasting matters tremendously, and based on that forecasting, we're typically getting our incident management team stood up within probably 3 days advance of the storm's arrival. So forecasting matters a lot.
All right, thanks, Mark. Leslie, how about the city of Asheville's perspective?
So the city set up an EOC by like Tuesday afternoon, which was great, which then allowed the department to internalize that same process. We have practiced that, which was good. We felt a little bit more confident in our abilities to manage incidents. We annually review our emergency action plan. We knew our partner communities also had copies and inundation mapping, so we felt good about that. Staff, went ahead and reviewed the EAP and then basically had a call with our consulting engineers, which was Schnabel, talking through the possibilities of what could happen, and felt really good about, okay, there's going to be water coming down the principal, there's going to be water coming over the auxiliary. That will be kind of exciting in a way because it'll be the first time that water would flow over it. We also, because we operate 2 treatment plants at each of those dams, we have staff there 24 hours a day, so we knew we would also have eyes on it. We don't have a good camera system to look at the dams or the spillways. And we had prepped the staff for, you might be here more than 8 hours, you might be here more than 12 hours. And then we also, across our distribution system, had different things staged. So I think we felt really good, and I'll tell you kind of a funny story that my husband the night before had 4 or 5 Lowe's buckets filled up with water, and he asked me, he goes, do you think we need to fill the tub? And I said, you know what, we've got a new auxiliary spillway, and in the years between 2004 and 2019, we actually put in a 36-inch bypass that went down underneath the stream. So we have 2 transmission mains that come out of the main plant, a 24 or 36. They're attached to this 36-inch bypass. We isolated those, had all the water going through the bypass. I'm like, we're going to be okay. There's going to be some water outages. There's going to be some lines that are damaged, but we're going to be fine. I was wrong.
Thank you, Leslie. Dustin, how about Town of Lake Lure?
So when the town of Lake Lure, when we get a storm predicted, and as the predictions are progressing, as the storm gets closer to Lake Lure, we start having planning sessions. These planning sessions usually start between my office and the hydroelectric office and the dam operations office. We had started a meeting and having conversations earlier in that week. We knew that the lake level was below, 4 to 5 feet down from normal pond, so we knew we had quite a bit of capacity that we could capture during the storm. And then as the forecast starts progressing and the predictions go up for the amount of precipitation that we get, we start advancing these meetings. So I had meetings with North Carolina Emergency Management, our local emergency management. We ramped up a EOC just like Buncombe County and the city of Asheville done. And then by Wednesday, due to the forecast increasing, the amount of resources that we were talking with Duke Energy and some other resources that would be staging in the area, we went ahead and decided to declare a state of emergency for the town of Lake Lure. What this does for us is it releases funds that normally wouldn't be available to us from an operational standpoint to make decisions that would inherently save life and property. And then we go from there and we start making preparations, just like the city of Asheville. We start ramping up our staffing, how many shifts we got covered at the stations that we operate out of, and then we start making preparations as far as how we're going to communicate with the community and get this information out. So we have several forms of communication. We use social media app that's called Everbridge. We use that to be able to notify our residents and downstream interests about the possibility of needing to evacuate in the event of a storm. So.
All right, thank you, Dustin. How about Toby? How about the state?
Well, the state's been really used to a lot of coastal hurricanes for the last, forever. We got a nice little wake up 4 or 5 years ago from a little thing called Tropical Storm Fred, which gave us sort of a prelude of what could possibly happen in a worst case scenario, and kind of hoping that might have been the worst case scenario that we'd seen in our mountain counties. It wasn't. But what it did do is it did help us prepare for and look at and make sure that we knew we had some vulnerability in dealing with our western counties. Of course, first thing we do in preparation, of course, I was here when I was in Denver at the conference last year when our state EOC activated. It activated a couple of days early, so I got to leave a couple of days early and deprive all of you of me for the little time I had left with the board in my last year. But particularly we were able to look at and identify and communicate with dam owners, working with them, particularly the sensitive dam owners, dams that are under construction, dams that are under repair, making sure that they're prepped and ready, and hoping that they're battening down the hatches so that they can handle what's expected to come. We had some really good forecasts, and of course those tended to change over the next couple of days as they went. But the preparation and talking with our dam owners, with the local emergency management, with state emergency management, we were able to set up those initial communication lines. We're going to talk about communication a little bit later in this, but you'll see what works and what doesn't work, and we'll give that a highlight to you.
All right, thanks, Toby. Yeah, so it sounds like everyone was, felt as well prepared as they could have for this type of storm, recognizing that, no one up here certainly had seen a storm of this magnitude in the mountains of western North Carolina in our lifetimes, and well over 100 years. So the next question I have is, communication and site access challenges. They were really unprecedented during this event and had some significant impacts. So I wonder if you can describe those challenges and how they impacted your response, and just how they impacted things related to the storm. I'd like to start, if we can, with Leslie.
So I think initially most of us didn't realize the significant impact on the communications. We assumed, yeah, there might be some towers out, my texts maybe don't seem to be going through, connections being dropped. I think for me, the first time that I really realized how impacted the area was as I walked over, I live in the town of Black Mountain, so I could walk over to their EOC, because I thought, oh, certainly they have communication, only to find out that they did not have any better communication than I did on my phone either. The state radio system was either not functioning at the high level it needed to, or there was just too many people on the radio system. AT&T we found out later on, had a transmission main cut, so communication through email, texts, phone calls was pretty limited. It became like the game of telephone. Do you remember playing that in kindergarten? You get a message and you pass it to your friend and that friend and that friend, and we just all hope that we're taking the right notes. So trying to access the first plant, I have a SUV. I thought, I can be able to pick my way over there, and my 4.5 mile drive, which usually takes 8 minutes, I think took me 20 to try to find a route, and wound up, because of a 6-foot wide old oak tree that impeded the road right before the gate, I had to actually drive through someone's front lawn, which is kind of disturbing as a public servant. Luckily, other people had already done it, and the neighbor stood there and said, yes, just go. So, I would go from one plant and gather information, and then I'd pick my way down to the city EOC, and I would talk to my director, and then we would exchange information. And then I would go to City Hall, that somehow miraculously had internet and power because it has a generator, and that was really helpful. We were able to get out some information and gather information, and then I would do it all in reverse. Go back by the EOC, here's the information I have now, give me what you have, ask me questions that I need to gather, go back out to staff, talk to them, turn around, do it again. And I think the other thing for me that was really interesting was to see how fast our IT was able to respond. And within about 4 days, we had hotspots from that AT&T either donated or we purchased, and that really made a significant difference in our abilities to communicate, and I think some of the level of anxiety we were already feeling, like, okay, now at least I can get that information back and forth, and I can make decisions, or I can help staff make decisions. I think the other thing that I learned, and I guess I found out more recently, reminded that Toby helped us with this, Civil Air Patrol, they're there to help, and whoever thinks to call them. So Toby worked out having them circle around and get a hold of me and me get a hold of them. And they were able so the storm hit Friday, on Sunday afternoon to take me up. Really grateful for my coworker who knows me really well. And before I stepped out of to go down to the airport, he said, remember to take your Dramamine. Which was good because those planes are really small. So the Civil Air Patrol, they took me over the Bee Tree Reservoir, the watershed, the dam. I could take pictures. And then they went back again, and they went over to the North Fork watershed and took photographs. So they had actually already flown over Sunday morning. They flew over Sunday afternoon. They did another flyover with my watershed manager on Tuesday. So they were really, really helpful, and I just, want to give them credit, and sort of now we have that as a note, they're readily available to us if we need.
Awesome. Thanks, Leslie. Dustin, how about you?
So our communications was much the same. During normal operations, we rely heavily on cell phone and that communications. During the storm, we activate our EOC. During a major event, North Carolina Emergency Management can bring in what we call a CAL, as a mobile communications tower. they can bring them in and we can use those. So we had all these resources gearing up, and we'd even talked about this during the meetings that we were having pre-storm. Little did we know that, like Leslie was saying, the roadways were completely gone. The only way to bring us communication equipment in after the storm had hit was, via helicopter or any kind of road that the NCDOT could get open to us. We couldn't get resources in and out of town. During the storm, we rely on those communications. We have stream gauges in the town. Those work through VHF radio frequencies, and they're sent and relayed to towers, and then we relay that information on, and we have real-time information coming in to our offices about the stream levels and river gauges. My assistant chief was up in Chimney Rock. He actually happens to be the fire chief of Chimney Rock Volunteer Fire Department too. And once the rivers and streams reach their flood stages, we stage personnel to do on-site monitoring. So we do boots on the ground, eyes on the river, because we don't want to miss any information that's coming in. We had stream gauges, our river levels marked on the pilings on the bridges coming down through the gorge. And I still remember the last conversation I had with my assistant fire chief on the phone during the storm when it was starting to peak. He said, "Chief, it's bad." And I said, "Well, I just left up there, and I know that the river was in flood stage. We were probably around 5 to 6 feet above our normal levels in the river." And I said, "What do you mean by bad?" And he said, "Well, since you've left, the rivers went up 3 to 4 feet. We've lost several bridges. We're starting to lose homes. We did get all the areas that we had spoke about and pre-planned about evacuated, and then the spotty conversations of the cell phones started going in and out, and so we were losing cell phone towers. So we had to revert back to radio communication. I don't know how much this group or this room understands about 700-800 megahertz digital radio system, but like Leslie was saying, it gets overwhelmed. You hit the button to key up to talk, and you get a bonking noise, and that means that you're not connecting to the tower, or there's too many people trying to get on the system. We had I think it was over 1 million missed keys on the radio. They keep track of these in the EOC, so every firefighter, when you hit your button, or a police officer or EMS worker, anybody in emergency services, when you hit your button on your radio, it tracks that radio's capability of being able to hit the tower. So after the storm, 2-week period, we had over 1 million missed keys on the radio for communication, trying to relay that information.
Thanks, Dustin. Laura, how about TVA's perspective?
So for us, our EOCs they were outside of the eye of the storm, essentially. So they were in Chattanooga and Knoxville. And so those folks were able to communicate very well. But the folks that we'd sent to the site at NOLA Chucky, they were primarily trying to use their cell phones. And as the evening went on, that became progressively worse. They asked for a satellite phone to be delivered, and we have a police force, so we dispatched a police officer with a satellite phone to go to them. Of course, they had to be rerouted, and that was delayed because of road closures and down trees, et cetera. But when the satellite phone got there, really, it didn't perform any better than the cell phones did, and the folks there were frustrated with it, and they ended up just trying to use their cell phones still. So, but spotty information in that way. In terms of access, we did have issues with the down trees. We did send a crew to like Watauga Dam to clear trees, so that worked out well for us. At NOLA Chucky, as the floodwaters continued to rise, the folks on site had to retreat, and they actually found a Dollar General parking lot uphill, basically, where they could kind of monitor the water level, and then as it went back down, they went back to the site. And in terms of access there, we still had access to the right abutment. We did not have access to the left abutment. And so we ended up flying a drone with thermal imaging because it was dark to try to get just some information about what was going on that left abutment.
Thank you. Stan, how about the state from up?
With regard to communication, we had always historically relied on cell phones. We cover the western 19 counties, and that morning I was on the cell phone. We still had cell service that earlier that morning. And I was on the cell phone with staff, with the EOC, with some of our specific dam owners, and it was going all right. The conversations were spotty. Texts were generally coming through until one specific conversation. I was actually on the phone with Lake Lure, and they had just informed me that they were getting ready to evacuate downstream, that the lake was 6 inches from the top of the dam and appearing to rise, and they were just hoping that they would be able to continue communications with their rescue workers downstream. They informed me that they would give me a call back and let me know the status. And immediately after we hung up, my cell phone went to SOS only, silence. Later that afternoon, in order to, when we finally had the roads opening up, because everywhere there were downed trees, power lines, landslides, roads were missing, but some of the neighbors had cut what can only be described as tunnels through the trees that were laying on the ground. Whenever that happened and we were actually able to get out a little bit, I'd gone and checked on a couple other dams, and finally drove down to Clayton, Georgia, before I could get cell service. It was approximately 5 hours later when I was able to get a hold of the EOC, and the first thing that I asked was, do we still have a lake at Lake Lure? And they said, fortunately, that the dam had held, and there had been some damage to the abutment, but the dam had held. So that was, an incredible relief. The next thing I asked was, how can I and my team assist? Over the course of the next week or so, I drove back and forth between Clayton, Georgia and North Carolina to coordinate with the EOC and to get with my team and to look at dams. So communications was a real problem for at least a week there. Toby was able to get us some bivy sticks, which are just satellite communication texting devices. And we have also since ordered Viper radios, and we're going to get 2 per regional office. So that's going to be incredibly helpful. If there's one major lesson learned on the communications side, it's have some redundant forms of communication. Have something that works satellite that's not just counting on infrastructure or cell towers.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, for sure. I mean, this event, that's a key takeaway here is in terms of the communication. I think a personal anecdote regarding Lake Lure is I was sitting in Greensboro Friday morning, which is about 2.5 hours east of Lake Lure. I'm getting calls from the local emergency management officials, from the regulators asking, is Lake Lure Dam still there? And of course, I have no idea, but they're not able to get in touch with the people that are on the ground there to know. So there's just significant, again, the game of telephone, trying to understand what was really happening during this event. Next question is about emergency action planning. Many of you, or maybe all of you, had to make the decision at one point during the storm to activate an EAP or multiple EAPs. Can you describe kind of that decision process and what that looked like? And start with you, Laura, on TVA's side.
So at TVA, we activated our EOC on Friday in response to the widespread flooding. Obviously, there were a few dams that were under a close watch. And so our forecast center, we're fortunate in the Tennessee Valley the way that we're able to manage the river. And they were doing a great job with that and definitely lessened the impact to the valley through their management of the river system. But there was really nothing that they could do for Nolichucky Dam the way that it's configured, and it's a non-regulating dam. And so for Nolichucky, as the day progressed, we became more and more concerned with it, obviously. And there were some critical elevations that we were trying to monitor in terms of if headwater reached those elevations, that there could be like stability issues or, initiation of a failure mode. But we were at a disadvantage in that our headwater data was only coming in once an hour, is the way that the loggers were programmed. And then also the upstream, the stream gauge was washed out. So we weren't able to get that information that we were expecting to be able to get in that situation. And so we had to make decisions with incomplete data. And one key lesson, though, that we learned was, we had our risk assessments that we'd done, but we had not had the time yet to incorporate, those failure modes and triggers into our EAPs. And so that's something we're definitely going to do, because that would have made our decision-making process a lot faster if we'd had those laid out in terms of, actions to take with those triggers. And then also, just the event reminded us that as engineers, we love data, right? And but in this situation, we did not have, the data that we were expecting and that we were hoping to have, and we had to make decisions without that perfect data. So we had to be flexible in that and adaptable.
Yeah, that's a key lesson for sure. Dustin, how about Lake Lure?
So we implemented our EAP about Wednesday. I know you hear a lot of the panelists talk about Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's kind of how our planning went. On Wednesday, we had all those EAP meetings and preparation meetings for the storm, but then we went ahead and implemented our EAP on Friday due to the amount of rainfall that we had received pre-storm. So we were already monitoring the lake, monitoring the conditions at the dam. What really changed for us was on Friday, I was on top of the dam, inspecting the dam. I think the hydro director and the police chief and some other town officials were there with us. And that was when I had that last phone conversation with the assistant chief. I had to make a call at that point in my career I'd never wanted to make. We were standing on the dam looking at the conditions of the dam. We have 3 floodgates, Tanner gates at Lake Lure. We knew we could operate 2 of them under normal operations. The third one, which happens to be in the middle, or it's the second gate, we were instructed to try to veer away from using that, and that was due to the condition of the seal plate underneath the gate. So once you operated the gate, we were concerned that once we went to go close it, that it wouldn't seal completely or properly. But we were past that point already during the storm. So the hydro director and myself had a conversation we felt we needed, and he consulted with the engineers. He felt that we needed to go ahead and operate that gate. And at this point, we're already past, we are in an emergency stage. But after I had that phone conversation with our assistant chief, the lake level rose so quickly. I can't even describe to you in words in this room how quickly the lake level was coming up for us. I had that phone conversation, and Chris was telling me how bad it was, and that there was a wall of water coming towards Lake Lure. I remember distinctively standing on the lake, on the dam, and looking across the lake and seeing the water level had already rose to the point that it was on the eaves on most of the boat houses that were inside the lake. So boats that were on lifts were done pushing through the roofs of these boat houses, and water had already come up on the eaves of the structures that were around the lake. Water started overtopping the dam on our buttresses. We watched several boats and boat pieces and parts go over top of the dam. While we were standing there, the power lines that stretched the gorge below the dam looked like an accordion. They started going back and forth. And the lines that supply our substation from our hydroelectric plant caved into the river. And then I watched the sinkhole and depression start to form on the left abutment. I'm not gonna lie, it was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever had to do so far in my career. And I had to sit in my truck and I had to pray a little bit before I made this next call. I wanted to elevate our EAP to the red level. I've always been told by our dam engineers that if you start to see deterioration on where the abutments of the dam attached to the wall, you're behind. You're already behind. Like, we should be doing something to evacuate those people downstream. So the only form of communication I had to get in my truck. I sat there for just a second and I prayed before I made this, because I knew everybody in this state would have the capabilities of hearing us on the Viper system. And I made the radio call for imminent dam failure at Lake Lure. And I've done that to protect the lives and property downstream. I then took my guys, we went to the fire station, got a Zodiac boat, and we went around and was down below the dam pulling people out of their second stories of their homes, pulling their animals, them off of their front porches, because I knew that those homes were going to be completely gone when I was there. I'll tell a quick funny story. One of our public works supervisors was down there helping me with a front end loader. We put our Zodiac on a front end loader, lifted it up as high as it could to get as deep as we could in the water below the dam so we could get to these homes. And I looked at him, I said, you need to put a life vest on. And he started laughing. He said, Chief, what's the point? He said, if the dam goes, he said, what's a life vest going to do at this point? And I was like, wow, there's some truth to that. You know, I was like, here I am worried about a life vest, and we're pulling people out of their homes on the second story down below the dam. But anyways, you get to thinking about stuff like that, about your crews that's responding, and I'll go a little bit more personal with some stories a little later on down the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin, for sharing that. Toby, how about the EOC?
Well, the EOC, you know, stayed busy. Like I said before, activated a couple of days before the event actually hit, just because we knew we were going to be getting some impacts to Western North Carolina, especially where we would expect typical rainfall to be, and we were starting to see increases day to day on those predicted rain amounts, especially in where we knew were vulnerable areas. Of course, during that time, not only had I flown back early, the rest of our staff were working on flying back from the conference. We have two of our regional engineers in the audience here with us today, Jerry and Tamara Eflin, who run two of our other Western Piedmont, and actually Tamara touches quite a bit of our northern mountain counties. Were working their way back as well. I believe they were able to get out maybe a day earlier than planned. But some other little things kept cropping up. And one of the things that Jerry was able to help organize, and not only had he not only done training just a few weeks, maybe a month or two before, with his staff on a new siphon emergency trailer system that we had. They went ahead and actually implemented it in a local community that had issues with sinkholes on a high hazard dam. And they called and said, hey, can you help us get this drained? We'd like to go ahead and do an emergency breach on this thing, so we don't have to worry about it during and following the storm. So Jerry's team got out there, they got everything set up, and then the local community was actually able to knock out that emergency breach within a day and get it stabilized, and not too much before the storm actually hit and started coming on shore towards us. That was just a weird little event we were glad to be able to help with, but just cutting it that close, but able to get it done. But of course, again at the EOC, we were on 24/7 rotations, and we've got several staff here in the audience that are here with us now that happen to be with us then as well. But our staff back in the office were able to be on the phones, make sure they're talking to people. But one of the things that I sort of remembered that Dustin sort of talked about and he mentioned was making that call for evacuations and going to advancing that level on their emergency action plan, because like you said, when that went out over Viper radio, within 30 seconds of that going out over Viper radio, State EOC is contacting me and saying, what's going on? We need details, because we didn't have that, phones were going down then too. So we didn't have a lot of the details. So, I've got to give some kudos over here to my right, because my first call went to Jonathan. Said, hey, I don't know if you've been able to reach them. I know that you guys have been talking, but what's the current condition? We're hearing we've got evacuations. Do we know what's going on? This guy made a Herculean effort to get there. I think it took him 3 or 4 different directions with help of emergency management just to cut his way in as engineer of record to even get there to help work those communications through. And I'll stop there and go to the next part, because the story sort of will carry on with everybody else as we go.
Yeah, sounds good. Mark, anything quickly to add from the EOC's perspective?
Well, I mean, the EOC is a beehive, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you have the opportunity to spend time in your respective emergency operations centers. I'm told that the North Carolina Emergency Operations Center is sort of the envy of most of the states. It's a state-of-the-art facility. We obviously are there as a partner with all of the other responding agencies when there's an event like this. You've got Highway Patrol, Coast Guard, National Guard, us, DOT, dam safety. I mean, it's FEMA. Everybody's in the room, all problem solving together. So really extraordinary collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. So overall, I'd say, from an emergency action planning standpoint, it was very effective, and what happened in this storm. Some tough decisions to be made, but overall, the process there generally worked like it was supposed to. One thing I want to touch on, kind of the next question, is misinformation and misreporting. It seems to be a common theme in current events, right? And it was certainly very prevalent in this storm. So curious to hear a little bit about that from you all and how you dealt with it, what challenges did that present, and how did you overcome those? So Leslie, start with you.
Okay, so storm hits Friday. Sunday evening, a friend out of Florida texts me and basically says, like, is everything okay? We hear there's something with your dam, basically. And I'm like, no, everything, that's fine, nothing, the dams are fine. And thought, well, that's kind of odd. He usually monitors, he used to live in the area, so he's on a lot of Facebook things. Well, then I start to begin to hear people start asking me questions. So what happened, we realized in hindsight, is a resident, so we have the Beatree Reservoir and Dam, and there's one way in, and it's a valley, and someone had talked to someone else and came upon a volunteer fireman and told him that the dam was in imminent failure. He had just talked to an expert. So I think that volunteer firemen, rather than following the chain of command and your usual emergency action EOC guidelines, immediately thought, I need to save lives, posted it on Facebook. The nearby community of Black Mountain picked it up, posted it on Facebook. Neither one of them had checked with Buncombe County EOC, nor the city of Asheville, nor myself. So, it's really hard when to take that moment and kind of go, I need to check the facts. This is a resident. Does this resident really know this information to be true? So luckily I was at the EOC. City manager's like, how's the dam? I'm like, it's fine. I just flew over it, this afternoon, and called me into a private room and was like, is the dam okay? I'm like, it is okay. I mean, the area is not great, but the dam will hold. There's no need to evacuate. So for me, what I just was horrified because here you have all these people who have lost property, private roads, bridges, they're stranded. People had already gotten out, had seen the devastation, and bodies and cars and everything not where it's supposed to be. And here we are, like 48 hours later, re-traumatizing them. Obviously, I mean, I knew things were going to be okay, but I thought, my gosh, like, let's just check the information. Let's not say things like this. I had a friend that lived on that road. She called me up. She's asking, and I'm like, just stay put. You are fine. Just stay where you are. Do not go out. So for me, that's still like something that really could have all been avoided for those people.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We're a little short on time, so I'm going to do a little bit of rearranging here. But kind of ultimately, if we have time at the end, ask some follow-up questions. But ultimately, want to talk about sort of lasting impacts here, and what are the key takeaways? What did you all learn? What do you feel like is a key takeaway for the dam safety community here? And I'm going to start with Mark. Start with you and kind of see.
Sure, yeah. So I think there was a slide early on that talked about impact to the electric system. To clarify that a little bit, just on our system, we lost between 15 and 19,000 power poles. Lost, just gone, right? We're not accustomed to that sort of impact. We're accustomed to trees coming down on lines that we have to repair when it's a coastal hurricane. So we lost 15 to 19,000 power poles. We lost estimated 9 million miles of wire. That's obviously an impact that you can't forecast, you can't really plan for. The communications situation obviously is crucial. The Viper towers, when we're in the EOC, we're trying to prioritize power restoration to folks like hospitals, EOCs that are out there in the community, Viper Communications Network. To give you an idea, typically in the fall every year, we participate in a large grid scale exercise, and we do a lot of exercising at the power company to make sure that we're able to respond in an appropriate fashion. This year, we're not doing a grid-related exercise, we're doing a communication resilience exercise. And that is specifically because of the communications challenges associated with Hurricane Helene. And the last thing I'll say as it relates to misinformation, there was a lot of talk of the Walters Waterville Dam. It's a dam in western North Carolina with Tennessee and downstream communities. There was a rumor that that dam had failed, and it went to social media and sort of incited a little bit of panic. I don't know what brought the Roman Empire down, but I think social media is going to be responsible for bringing down civilized society in the 21st century, right? We've got to understand the impact of our words and our communications in times like this, and we've got to trust, but that we've got to verify, right? So for us, I mean, the communications issue is really key.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, how about you from the meteorology standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have said it so many times, especially being on the ground and dealing with the situation. Communication is so key. And in these kind of situations, we say it all the time, things are not going to be normal. Roads are out, power's out, normal communication's out. So do you have a plan to deal with almost going back to analog in some cases? How do you get there? And to me, it's how do you communicate beyond the EOC to the normal public, the people that are out there getting misinformation or getting affected by this? They're the ones who don't know what's going on and are afraid and want to get that. And I don't know that answer, but hopefully we can learn from these type of events. How do you communicate to them? Again, I go back not only this event, the Kerrville, Texas event, that so many things could be avoided if there was a way to get the message out, to get out of harm's way, and to make real-time appropriate decisions based on good information. So that communication flow on so many levels is so critical. The other thing that's interesting, all these issues that we had, the dams all performed as planned and were safe. That's, for this community, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Tells you how important what we do is, that everything else is failing around it, but the dams were good. So that, you guys should all be take a pat on the back for that and note that that's special.
Agreed. Toby, how about you?
As they said, communication is key, and there are multiple levels of communication, and they've sort of hinted on each part of it. The redundancy, if you don't have it, demand it from your management. If you don't have it, you're not going to be prepared for one of these situations, and it will worsen things until it gets better. The misinformation part, from what Bill and Leslie had mentioned, misinformation's got to be handled and tackled really quickly, because also, like Mark said, the downfalls are probably going to be our social media. There are trolls out there that, like he said, cause these issues with claims of flooding in. This happened to be in a Tennessee town, flooding a local hospital, which garnered phone calls from Terrell in Tennessee to me, said, hey, we hear we've got a dam that has failed in North Carolina. It's flooding one of our towns. The lucky thing is in our EOC, we're set up with communication, so within infrastructure. So I'm sitting right beside the Duke representative, who's getting on their communication lines, and within 2 minutes, we had the operator of that dam on the phone with us, and we reported what we were told. This part's a little bit, humorous in that he said, well, hang on a second, I'm in the power room right now. And so he said, let me step out and look up out the door. So he stepped out, looked up, and over the phone, and we had him on the speaker, he said, well, if this dam's failed, you're talking to my ghost, because I'm not here anymore, but no, everything's fine here. So we were able, because of pre-planning, with our emergency management, with our partners, because that partner planning and working that exercising every year with that communication is the key. And the biggest part is that we do at least 2 annual preps for hurricanes in North Carolina every year, which includes this whole team. From the state level, all the state agencies, all the local emergency management agencies communicate and partake in that. And we built the tools over the time. Like Dennis had mentioned, we've got flood gauges that basically run throughout the state on a system called Feynman. If you want to look it up, take a look. It's very interesting because it shows normal flows, then it shows what flood stages you're in, which helps us predict where we're going to see issues. And so we're currently trying to keep on improving those systems. We've got Jacob Smith, one of our dam safety staff here in the audience with us too, that's helping us work on and improving early warning systems for local management to identify where we're going to have hotspots during these things, so we can pre-communicate and talk to them during the events, so that we are putting people and resources where they need and not scattered all over the place. And of course, I got to take just one more second just to mention, we're trying to do the same thing with landslides now. We're trying to create an early warning landslide system, because that was one of our biggest impacts from this event, because of the topography that we were dealing with. We had one small little area where a slide occurred, where we had a family of 12 killed. And one of the things that they didn't know is that they had built and they were living in a landslide area that's been landslide area for thousands of years. You know, the Appalachian Mountains are one of the oldest mountain chains in the world, and everything that you see in the valley is landslide. So that's, you know, that's the importance of trying to combine and making sure we're using everything that we're doing, not only with dams, but with our landslide piece as well, because we've seen landslide impacts to our dams, to our impoundments, to our water resources, public water supplies. So you know, putting those tools together, putting that communication together, and make sure it works, and having that redundancy, it's key. You know, take lessons learned from us, call us, you know, say, hey, how did you handle these things? How did you fund it? Who did you work with, and how did you make those communications happen? Because, you know, without all the teams talking and working together, it's just going to fall apart, and it's going to be a worse situation when you know, we thought we had it really bad. It could have been worse.
Yeah. Thank you. Laura, any closing thoughts?
I guess, and just for us, communications, again, it's with processes and equipment. You know, obviously the satellite phones didn't work, but also the gauging network. And then, of course, getting those risk assessment findings into our emergency action plans. And, of course, I would not wish Helene on anybody, right, like what we had to go through. But, I mean, the good thing that came out of it is we've been tested, and we've gotten this experience now, and we've learned so much. We've had reviews conducted of our response, and we've gotten so many good, you know, continuous improvement thoughts around our emergency preparedness. And so, but the biggest thing is, like I said, it just calibrated our team, and now, you know, when it happens again, I think we'll be better prepared just because of the experience that our team went through. It's better than any exercise or training you could ever go through.
Yeah. So, Leslie, how about for the city?
I guess impressing on your dam owners the need to maintain, rehabilitate, and I guess fund those rehabilitation projects. Things would have been really different in Asheville had we not had that auxiliary spillway. So I'm really glad that we started in 2012 with the basic, like, looking at designs and construction in 17 and finished it in 2020. So I think that's where, you know, dam owners, and I think there's a lot of small dams that we just don't realize, those private dams that need to be educated, those owners.
Thank you. Stan, can you take us out?
Sure, be happy to. After Helene, we went and inspected with a statewide team that Brad Cole had put together. We went and inspected over 300 high-hazard dams just in my region alone. And the one key takeaway is we had no breaches except for one dam that was a run-of-the-river dam on the Swannanoa River that had been drained for decades, pretty much my entire lifetime. So I was impressed. I was actually a little bit amazed, and I got to thinking about it. And as engineers and scientists, we all work in the realm of the theoretical. Thankfully, we very seldom ever get to see those theories put to the test. How many times I've sat here in these very conferences and watched in fascination the lessons learned with dam failures, listened to the horror stories, and you know, they're always some time away or some place away, but this storm, for many of us on this panel, as you can see, it was personal. It hit where we live, where we work. It hit our homes. And so I just, you know, the meteorology, the flooding was incredible, triggered landslides. We had four disasters in my viewpoint. We had flooding, we had landslides, we had straight line winds, and I saw several, for lack of a better term, mini cyclones or pop up and take down forested areas. And I just look back at it, and I keep coming back with gratitude to one thought. Thankfully, because of the hard work and the diligence of the dam safety community, we had 4 disasters, not 5. Our dams held. You saved lives.
Thank you, Sam. Well, thank you, everybody. We could, I don't know, it's not on the agenda, but we could do a panel extension that goes till noon if you want to hang out. There's just so much to share about this event. We do have a couple minutes for questions, maybe take 1 or 2 if folks have them. I think the panelists will be around for a while after this if you want to come up and chat. But if anyone's got any questions now, feel free to fire them off. No questions.
Wow.
I don't believe you.
Ready for a break?
Oh, there's one.
Yeah. Dustin, you have 3 minutes to tell this story.
Stories get real personal during the storm. And if I could echo anything that was said up here, was one that our safety features, our EAPs, they worked. And that's due to a lot of hard work in this room and around the nation. But if I tell a story and I get emotional, I apologize, but we put a lot of hard work and effort into it. We study these EAPs, we do tabletop exercises, we prepare our communities, we try to notify people the best that we can. We had flood warning sirens in place, tested all of them, brand new. I mean, Everbridge, all these notification systems. During the storm, after I'd left the dam, we were pushing our way to town hall. When I say pushing, I mean we were moving dirt, trees, transformers. I called EOC and made sure they made contact with Duke Energy to kill the substation, all the power coming into Lake Lure. We were driving tractors, bulldozers. I'm not even kidding. A lot of people laugh and they think that's unrealistic, but honestly, we commandeered bulldozers and was plowing through town to get to Chimney Rock because I knew there was a lot of people stranded up there. When we reached Chimney Rock, the main bridge going across through town was cut off. I had 14, 15 feet. Jonathan had a picture of it in the slides at the beginning. I don't know if you've seen it, and that was after we had started clearing some of the debris off of it. And I pushed through. This is after we made the call for imminent dam failure. Went downstream, saved as many people as we could downstream that we could reach. I made the decision to turn my crews west, and we were going to Chimney Rock to get the folks that were stranded in the Hickory Nut Gorge area and Chimney Rock Village. We had a task force convoy, we had law enforcement, we had swiftwater rescue teams. I'd already put the request in for the NC Heart team, which most folks don't realize. NC Heart team is North Carolina Hilo Aquatic Rescue Team. So they get deployed all over the United States to different locations. A lot of them done operations in Katrina, some of the other major storms, Matthew, and so forth. We had the North Carolina Heart team on request. They sent the North Carolina Heart team, South Carolina Heart team, and the U.S. Coast Guard to Lake Lure to perform rescues. Just before the storm in April, we had run training operations with a helicopter rescue team and was picking folks up, learning how the technicians wanted to come down. After we pulled them across from the river or done the structure search, pulled those folks out, we were learning and training with these groups on how best to prepare and package these individuals for the helicopter to transport them. Anyways, I said all that to say this. We made our way into Chimney Rock, and there's helicopters flying everywhere. I couldn't count the number of helicopters that was in there, and the number of people that we were hooking up and sending up into these helicopters to be rescued. I brought my wife with me. I was worried about her well-being at home. Our home town had suffered a whole lot of damage, and I knew I could keep an eye on my wife and kids at the fire department, and I brought them with her. She said she would come on one condition, if I would give her a job to do. Little did I know that I was going to be giving her an awesome job, but we commandeered a Morgan Corp bus. So if there's any Morgan Corp folks out there, appreciate you letting us use your bus. We commandeered a Morgan Corporation bus that they used to transport some of their staff. We did touch base with the direct supervisor, and they gave us permission to use it. We were hauling folks back and forth. Well, in flies this helicopter, a little two-seater private helicopter. And he flies in. We're doing operations. Toby's done mentioned the family that had passed away, and that family actually happened at the northern end of our district. And one of the battalion chiefs that worked for Fairview Fire Department that was directly related to a lot of my staff, and with me personally, I've done a lot of training with him, had passed away while he was performing a search inside of a structure. A landslide happened, and he had passed away, and we'd just got news of that. So I'm keeping all that in the back of my mind, trying to protect my crews. This helicopter comes in as a private helicopter, two-seater helicopter. The guy flies right in, lands, drops his co-pilot off, and picks some victims up, or picks a victim up. Flies back and lands in the middle of the roadway, just west of the bridge that you've seen in the middle of the road. That blocked the only way and method I had to get resources in and out to our folks. That was our only point of egress for the rescue teams, the task force teams, all the crews that we had working in that area. That was our only means and methods to exit that. I was in a process of transporting some of the victims back to the shelter. My assistant chief calls me and he says, "Chief, there's this helicopter that's landed that's blocked our means of egress. We can't get any resources into us. What do you want us to do?" I said, "Well, call the tail number in, call it into the EOC. Let's see if he's part of the rescue operation." We done that, and they said, "No, he's not. Get him out of there." So my assistant chief walks over and tells the helicopter pilot he can't land there. He's blocking our means of egress. He needs to leave. He said he wasn't going to leave without his co-pilot. So he took back off, went back up there, picked his co-pilot up. Now, a lot of you in this room are thinking, what's going on with that? But when you come into an emergency situation, you drop a person off, you've just added to our victim load. I don't know if that helicopter is going to be able to make it back to pick that person up that they dropped off. So they added to our victim load. Then when you come back and you land in the only area that I have free and clear to get my crews in and out and resources in and out to us, there's a lot of problems with that. So we had to run that helicopter off. I wasn't even there. I was on the other side of town. I come back to the fire station and my wife is crying, bawling. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "It's bad." I said, "What do you mean bad?" And she said the stories went viral. So this helicopter pilot flew back to the airport, got a hold of Queen City News, released a story, and in that story he said that we threatened him with arrest, that we turned away help, that countless people are going to die because the fire chiefs up in Lake Lure are turning away help, wasn't allowing folks to come in there and help and do what was right and all this. Well, none of that was going on. We did turn him away, because of where he landed and the resources that he brought, but it wasn't us turning a multitude of help or resources away. So I asked my wife, I said, what do you mean by it's bad? And she said, well, Queen City News out of Charlotte, North Carolina, got a hold of it, released the story, and the stories went viral. I didn't think much of it in my line of work. You make some decisions that makes a whole lot of people mad. But I considered it a blessing, and it was a blessing during the storm that we only lost one life in the Lake Lure and Chimney Rock area in our area, and that was due to a terminally ill patient who we give 3 opportunities to leave her home, and she chose to stay at home, and she ended up passing away during the storm. So I dedicate, I think about the dedication and the hard work of my crews going and doing these evacuations and stuff. But when I got back, I had over 4,500 emails in a span of just a few hours. They ranged from you're a piece of crap, putting it nicely, to go find the nearest gun and blow your brains out, or I hope that they find the tallest tree in Lake Lure and string your body up by it so that the whole town can see it dangling. And, my wife was tore up. She's seeing all this good that the fire department's doing, all the crews, the number of people that we've saved. She's tore all to pieces. I was starting to get emotional about it, but we sent our kids away, and this is the straw that broke the camel's back. My 11-year-old started getting phone calls from Texas, Maryland, California. They got a hold of our cell phone numbers, and they was communicating threats, telling my little 11-year-old son they hope I died in the house fire. They wanted to burn my house down with my family in it, and they put all that on there. And it's one thing when they come at me, but when they start involving my kids, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. So I said we had to do something. The town hired a PR company that works with the North Carolina School of Government. They run their AI bots, and I got some bad information from that. They called me back and they said, Chief, we need to talk to you about what the AI bots has found about social media. And this goes along with all this miscommunication, was that there was, we were top 3 in Google searches out of the state of North Carolina for about 4 or 5 days. There's only 2 people that beat us, unfortunately. It was Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And they had run AI bots and said somewhere around 68 million people had seen our story, liked, shared, commented, said something about it. And that was a good thing, and it was a very bad thing. That gives a lot of leeway for folks to, misinterpret information and put whatever they want on there. So I would just exercise caution on social media and what's released out there, so that it doesn't negatively affect the operations of everything that we have going on.
Yeah. Thank you, Dustin. It's a very personal, powerful story. Appreciate you sharing that. So we're a little bit behind. Thank you all for coming. I know many, many people in this room had a big part in Helene, not just those up here. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference.